Good morning, everybody.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله. تعرف دكتور تركي؟ دكتور نبيل نظام الدين.
I'll start.
Going over now?
Yeah.
Will we have a chance to have discussion afterwards? Hard to know.
Sure.
It's hard, hard
Because
to know, but
Lewinsky's going to make some comments that I wish that it would be important if we had
you
some
see,
opportunity.
the next session, this is from 8:30 till 10:30, I think.
So we better get.
Let's see how
it
we're
goes.
doing. Yeah. Okay. مهم الدسكشن. احنا بدينا متأخر 10 دقائق الحين.
حننتهي متأخرين.
Just put that baby on right now. It's fine.
ايه إذا خلصوا الشباب في الوقت.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think before we start, I'd like to thank Dr. Faisal and Dr. Abdullah for this well-put, excellent scientific program. It's always good to see so many friends and colleagues. So thank you very much. My next speaker, or my actual first speaker, does not need any introduction, but for those who does not know him, Frank Demonico is a professor of surgery, Harvard Medical School. He's the president-elect of the Transplantation Society. He's an advisor of the WHO and director of the New England Organ Bank. He will talk to us today about the impact of logistical factors in organ procurement, the new UNIS allocation system. So go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Dr. Turkey. Thank you for that introduction, and happy to be with you this morning. Indeed, as the Chair has mentioned, the assignment is to talk about a different allocation system that might be forthcoming into the United States. I'm rather confident and assured about this topic with Dr. Timothy Pruitt being in the audience, who then mentioned to me this morning that just that we have a very candid discussion, this is not yet in the U.S., but it is being considered. And you'll understand why I think as we present these data about the evolution of kidney transplantation in the U.S., the demographics of that necessitate a different thinking about the distribution of organs that has been principally based in kidneys by time waiting. Now, this is a slide that reveals the recipient kidney ages, categorically from 1 to 5, as you see, and then all the way to 65. And what becomes evident is that over the course of the last decade, the proportion of patients receiving kidneys is older. So that the greater majority of kidneys is being transplanted to those 50 and 64 years of age, to greater than 65 years of age, and at the same time, you can see the decline in the proportion of the other age groups. Now, UNOS has made I thank my colleagues at UNOS who have provided this slide set that I could make this presentation. They've made a very thorough analysis of the situation, and they themselves have now brought forward what are the current system limitations. Well, there are high discard rates, and we'll show those data in this presentation, especially from those of the expanded criteria donors, and essentially that's an older age kidney. But it is also one in which there would be abnormal kidney function, a history of hypertension, the patient has died of a stroke. These are factors that certainly don't make for an ideal kidney transplant. The discard rate these days is 40% of those kidneys. And yet there are plenty of patients on the waiting list that could benefit. There's a variability in access to transplantation by blood group and geographic location. Many kidneys with long potential longevity being allocated to candidates with a significantly shorter potential longevity and vice versa. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's not entirely appropriate by utility to take a 20-year-old kidney and place it into a 70-year-old recipient. Similarly, vice versa, it's not very comforting to think that, well, we're going to take a 70-year-old kidney and put it in a 20-year-old recipient, right? So these disparities come about when we are just in a system of wait time and we're not in a system that assesses the utility of the organ for a specific recipient. An important, very important aspect of what must be in the allocation system, and this limitation now is made clear by UNOS. Now, this is a busy slide, but what are the goals then for a kidney allocation system? Well, we should better approximate graft longevity and recipient longevity. Let's match donor age with recipient age. Foster graft survival of the kidney transplant with the longest post-transplant survival. And those perhaps even likely to require additional transplants. Minimize the loss of potential functioning years of deceased donor kidney grafts. Meaning, if you took that 20-year-old kidney and placed it in a 7-year-old recipient, you lose lots of graft survival because the 70-year-old will die within 3 or 4 years, 5 years of transplantation. But the longevity of that kidney was still many years to go. So again, this disparity by wait time alone that doesn't consider utility jeopardizes the system to say, we are suffering greatly in the life years that could be gained as a result of the transplant if we don't consider, gee, are we matching the donor age and the donor recipient? So the UNOS group has proposed a kidney donor profile index to better characterize donor kidneys and to provide information for patients and providers to consider during the transplant evaluation process. This KDPI is a scale, continuous scale, of measuring kidney quality to estimate the potential function of a donated kidney if it were transplanted into the average recipient. The program is to suggest allocating the highest quality kidneys, and I'll show you how this metric works out, a KDPI of 20% or below, meaning it's in the best 20th of, within the 20th percentile of the best kidneys, to candidates with the highest estimated post-transplant survival. Now we're matching in a utility factor. This is a good kidney given to someone who's got the longest chance of survival. And as it turns out, such kidneys account for about 20% of the available kidneys. And at the same time, allocating the remaining kidneys, about 80% of these kidneys, to candidates that have a highest priority, yet are within 15 years of the donor's age. So that's the simplicity of it, but you can see the utility working its way through that system. So the current system, we had now maybe 10 years or more ago, during my time of UNOS leadership, the notion that, well, we've got these expanded criteria donor kidneys, shall we set a characteristic about them that would make them more available and, in effect, receiving some advantage of getting off the list for the older age patient to take that kidney. As it turns out, that thrust and intent has never been realized. So, the proposed system brings a KDPI of greater than 20% to candidates who are between 15 years older and 15 years younger than the donor. and kidneys with a KDPI of less than 20, meaning they're very excellent, to candidates with the longest estimated post-transplant survival. Now, this is a slide that goes into the details of what is KDPI and what is kidney donor risk index, right? Only to say that these are interchangeable. The KDPI is a mapping of the donor risk index onto a cumulative percentage scale. That a donor with a KDPI of a certain percentage, let's say 20%, has a KDRI of greater than a certain percentage of donors with this reference population. So here's how this looks. Here's the KDPI, here's the KD donor risk index, donor profile index, donor risk index, upon which this new system would be based. And as has been mentioned, those excellent kidneys within the top 20 percentile then bring a donor risk index that you see correspondingly here, with the median of 1, that is 50% of the kidneys of this profile index, and it shows what the estimated graft survival is at 1, 3, 5 years, etc. And so you can see as the KDPI with less than 20% has quite excellent survival. But even into the higher KDRIs, and we'll talk about that momentarily, there's still quite adequate survival, but depending upon the recipient's age. UNOS is going to have this program that you, as a transplant physician, can put in the demographics and develop the KDRI, KDPI, etc., and then be able to guide in your decision making as to whether this particular kidney that is being offered is indeed appropriate for the specific recipient that the transplant physician is considering. So once again, our standard expanded criteria system currently is obsolete. And the proposal takes us to now an indicator of the quality of the kidney, reference to who are the best candidates in terms of their longest survival to receive that kidney versus the others, which still has the benefit of a kidney transplant, but not quite the survival to be achieved. The KDPI is developed by these donor variables: race, ethnicity, age, principally age. I have a next slide to show how the corresponding PI is a major factor, is the age of that kidney. And I don't need to read through these, but you can see that these factors were the component of the development of the profile index. And the estimated post-transplant survival of the candidate is by age, presence, absence, diabetes, prior transplant, and the duration. The wait list impacts the survival of an individual, the duration that the patient has had end-stage renal disease. So this is what I was mentioning to you. If you take a look at the donor age, you see the donor profile index is clearly impacted by the age of the donor. So the system would be assessing the profile index of the kidney, allocating by survival matching. When the KDPI is less than 20, within the top 20% of the good kidneys, that is from 0 to 20%, they're allocated to those with the best, longest estimated time of survival. And if not, then the rest of these kidneys will be principally age matched. That's what that slide is talking about. And that age matching would be for candidates within plus minus 15 years of the donor's age. Now, why was that considered? Because, as it turns out, and other variables of plus or minus 10, plus or minus 20 was considered, But the plus minus 15, I'll just make a conclusion in the interest of time, was as a compromise with more even numbers of donors than available to all candidates, and not restrictive as much as it would have been if the limitation was at 10 or 20 plus minus years of the donor age. And this shows this. This is data that show the restriction to access of donors by the candidate age. This green bar is what that turns out to be if it is within plus minus 15 years, and you can see what the differences would be in terms of the percentage of donors available, and then those who would undergo transplant by the age. And this turned out to be the fairest in considering plus minus 15 years. So, what's the summary at the moment of what this might take us to? Well, there will be no changes in the proportion of transplants by ethnicity or blood type or by HLA match, but there would be a change in the proportion of transplants by diagnosis and recipient age. And here is a slide that gives the diagnoses of glomerular disease, hypertension, etc., and it shows the differences that have been modeled if this system were to be placed into effect. What might be minor differences, but you'll see that there is less diabetics being transplanted as a result. And yet, when it comes to the modeling, if this system were to be in effect, there would be a change in the proportion of kidneys that are going to the category of 18 to 34, 35 to 49, and simultaneously there would be a reduction in those 50 to 64 and greater than 65 years of age. And in fact, this is what is intended, to do now some age matching of these donor quality kidneys to those who have the longest chance expectation of survival. Now, I'll just end. So this is the concepts. I'll end by just bringing some data to attention. We're in a time in the United States where I would say to you, there's a compelling factor about making some change. And that is, we have kidneys available that are not being utilized. So this is the trends of discard over time, and you can see here that it's progressed dramatically over the course of time, that now we're dealing with 18, 90%, 19% of kidneys that are recovered, that is actually removed for the purpose of transplantation, are not being utilized. Now, of course, there are factors about that. There's been an increase in the donor age, etc. So the quality of the kidneys has changed somewhat. But there is no mistaking that it's not just a matter of expanded criteria donor kidneys that are being discarded. In the percentage of discard, there's still a third of the kidneys that are discarded that are of standard criteria donor characteristics. And that's nearly 1,000 kidneys in 2009. And so this, that's a reiteration of this slide, but it then shows you the percentages of the kidneys from each of these categories that are being discarded. And yes, there's 10% of kidneys that are being recovered that are SCD that are discarded. All right, well, now let's just examine this by KDRI distribution. And as it turns out, there are kidneys available in the ECD category that have a reasonable chance of survival that are being discarded and recovered. Now, this is a recovered slide, and then the discarded slide shows here are the numbers of 2,700 kidneys in 2009 that were discarded with quite excellent KDRI, KDPI analysis. Now, once you get into this, yes, there's worsened KDRI, but still there's a fair proportion of kidneys that would be suitable for an age population that doesn't have a longevity in requiring the benefit of a kidney transplant. Now, there's one other point that I want to mention, and then we'll close. In my view, the big missing gorilla yet in this is the reason for discard ascribed by the centers in the country, 40% of the time is biopsy. And biopsy at the moment, the biopsy characteristics of a particular donor kidney have not been in the measure of the DRI, DPI. And I have some concern that this biopsy, which it's unbelievable to me that still in this day and age, we do 19% of the kidneys that are recovered are biopsied with 18 to 34 years of age. Half of the kidneys between 35 and 49 years of age are being biopsied. Well, that's another characteristic that I don't think we at the moment have a handle on. And I think it's going to be an important aspect yet to come that UNOS has to resolve. But to conclude, I think it's important that there now is some reckoning of not just having wait time as the major component of the distribution of kidneys. One has to consider the utility, the effectiveness, the longevity of the kidney transplant, and I am encouraged that UNOS is moving in that direction. So, Mr. Chair, that was my assignment, to make this discussion, and I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Frank. I think we have time for 2 questions.
Adib, what do you think? Huh? We have kidneys available that should be transplanted. And I know you've said this to me before. Frank, send them to Pakistan in a hurry.
Mike, Dr. Rizvi.
No, that's fine. I think what he was doing was just reiterating, Mr. Chair, the same kind of sentiment. So,
Frank, I have a question.
please.
What about the match-mismatch factor? Is it put into this allocation system?
No,
So-
if the modeling would not seem to show that there will be great disparities in HLA matching as a result of this.
Even identical match?
Well, identical match will still receive some priority.
Yeah. Yeah.
Over in the
Abdullah.
corner there, yes.
Would you expect that
yes,
the old people to whom you are giving the worst kidneys would think this is an ethical thing for them?
No, that's a very...
I know you're relating it to longevity. But can you guarantee...
That's a very important point.
Exactly. Can you guarantee that it is the limiting factor is longevity and not kidney life?
So I accept that point, and I think it's a very important one. I think that if you were to characterize it in such a way as to say, well, now you're being greatly disadvantaged, older age population, then they might have an understandable objection. But if you were to say to them, your lifetime can be still enhanced by available kidney transplants, and you could as well understand that if we are taking into the entire pool of the recipients that are waiting for transplants, we have an obligation in those who are developing policy to try and see the benefit maximized of a kidney transplant. So we don't wish to deny this older person that opportunity, but we do so with a kidney that is appropriate for them in their longevity expectation. I think if we say that to the older age population, it will be accepted. And I should say to you, just very briefly, there have been now editorials in the New York Times, of all places, to support this system. Very important. So, Dr. Torki, thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
Excuse me, can I ask a question? Can I have a question, or there's no time?
You've asked, so
Okay.
you're the last question.
Okay. Congratulations for this elegant presentation, but I have some contradiction. How can the DPK, the KDPI could be applied to all groups? For example, it could be applied in the States and in the Gulf area. In spite of the original kidney disease varies quite. The original kidney disease of CKD varied in the States in comparison to the Gulf area, for example. So I feel some contradiction. Have you any explanation?
If you, it's my apology that it's hard for me to grasp completely the nature of your question, but what I heard is something that I would say to you. There is geographic disparity within the United States in those that can reach the list and those that can undergo transplantation. And that system still has, this new system will have to address that problem as well. We don't wish to overlook it. So thank you for bringing that point forward.
I think we have to move the next speaker, presented by Dr. Nabil.
Good morning. Well, I'm sitting